try not to hold a grudge, right? Move on to what the next part of the day is, and try not to be to let what happened at 10 o'clock ruin what's going to happen at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and so on.
And I received this child who engaged in very high frequency self-injury and aggression. I was 23 years old. I couldn't believe they entrusted me to do this.
The community as a whole is becoming more aware, right? So like we said, there's more Bollywood movies that are coming out that talk about diverse individuals.
How do I handle behavior? And the answer is it depends.
Hi, welcome to Conversations with Speechies. I'm Pooja.
Hi, I'm Alicia.
Hi, I'm Merin. Today's episode is a sneak peek on how our understanding of autism has changed over the years and what that means for the support we provide our children and their families.
So Merin, if I think about the past 10 to 15 years, I've realized that our understanding of autism has shifted so much. It's not only a list of struggles anymore, but how an individual with autism learns, communicates, and experiences the world around them so differently. If I have to think of an example, say a child who does not give eye contact. Maybe listening is easier if the child is not giving eye contact. You know, a child who repeats phrases and words over and over again, maybe that's how they process language. And some individuals on the spectrum may experience everyday sounds more intensely than we do. So with this shift in our understanding of autism, I think the support structures and the intervention also changes more towards respecting these brains that work and function so differently.
Pooja, everything that you've said is about being neuroaffirming. And yes, mindsets are changing and people are learning to appreciate that brains can be wired differently, and that's okay. A lot has changed over time. Earlier, autism intervention and support involved teaching children to fit in, telling them make eye contact, sit still, stop the stimming. But now we are asking different questions. Now we are thinking about, is the child feeling safe, regulated, calm? We're also thinking about how do we empower individuals to communicate in a way that's meaningful to them and that comes naturally to them versus forcing them to speak. So the focus is prioritizing on the overall well-being of the individual.
In today's conversation, we bring together professionals from the field of behavior intervention. We have with us Joel, Kevin, and Manika. Joel and Kevin are co-directors of the University of Georgia's Center for Autism and Behavior Education Research. They work with individuals with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. They help them build important life skills and reduce challenging behaviors.
Manika is the co-principal at the Gateway School of Mumbai. She's also a trained psychologist. She works with our students and learners on building so many social and emotional skills. She specializes in creating supportive learning environments within the classroom, and she also specializes in specific behavior supports for children.
Joel, Kevin, and Manika, thank you for joining us today. Kevin, we've been talking about how autism has evolved over time, how mindsets are changing, and how we're now seeing autism differently. Would you like to throw some light on what does the autism spectrum include today?
Sure. I think over the past couple decades, we've seen the definition of autism evolve. We've seen greater attention paid to individuals on the spectrum who have good language and can communicate fairly well, but also exhibit some of the same characteristics of autism. And, as our definitions and diagnostic criteria have evolved, I think our thinking about autism as part of the diversity of human experience has evolved as well. And, I think that's a positive thing for autistic folks, because we're addressing the needs of those individuals differently, perhaps, than we were a decade or two ago.
Yeah. So we're not seeing them as less, but we're seeing them as different, and the difference is okay.
I think that the differences are okay to the extent that they're able to integrate into society and get what they need from their community, and to be able to participate in their community and be welcome there. And so sometimes that takes teaching new skills, but it also requires teaching the community new skills as well. So I think it's definitely a multifaceted way that we need to move forward.
Yeah, we no longer see it as a one-way process where it's only the child who has to be supported, but the community also needs to understand, be aware, and know how to adapt.
Yeah, I think that we're beyond the awareness, autism awareness that was very popular in the 2000s. We're beyond that now. People know what autism is. Now it's time to begin looking at, all right, well, how do we include people with autism into our communities? And that's going to take a development of a skill set within the community that may not have been there before.
I think when you're saying, the awareness is there, but I feel like when we still think about individuals with autism, you still think about those stereotypical things, right? So unfortunately, because autism is a spectrum, we're still learning what comes under that spectrum. So I feel like while we understand autism exists, I think we're still understanding what all comes under that spectrum, at least here in India.
Kevin, my question is for you. When you see repeated challenging behaviors in a child, what is the first thing that you try and look at to understand the behavior or to understand what's really going on?
Sure. I think the first thing I look at is the environment around the child. I want to try to understand that environment from the experience of the child. What in that environment is unwelcoming? What is uncomfortable in that environment to them? Because in doing so, then I can start to look at how we might be able to alter the environment, or perhaps teach new behaviors to the individuals so they can alter the environment for themselves and kind of empower them to do that. But I think until we take a look at the environment around a child, we're not going to be able to address some of the challenging behaviors.
That's great. And which is such a powerful shift, right? Because I feel like so much time goes on that individual and what you can or cannot do, to take a step back and say, what have we created as a community, right? What can we do differently so everybody, regardless of who you are, has a place in it?
And I think that placing that emphasis on looking at the environment, and the environment includes the teachers, the therapists, the parents in that environment, and how do we change their behavior to better support or create opportunities for the individual who's having a difficult time.
You mentioned that also teaching the individual to change the environment for themselves. It reminds me of one of the children I'm working with, and there's a lot of construction going on outside his house currently. And what he did was he opened the window and he just yelled at the workers saying that's too much noise, can you stop? And then, and then the mom was like, you know what, they have to do what they have to do. And what can you do instead? And that's when he went in and put on his noise cancellation earphone. So he being aware that, yes, this is bothering me, but what can I do when the environment cannot change, is also a part of teaching and learning. So, Joel, my question to you is, we are talking so much about challenging behavior. What can parents do once the challenging behavior has occurred? They often wonder, do I sit down and teach my child a lesson, or do I reflect with them, or is it just a moment to reconnect and build that bond again?
Yeah, again, another great question. And I'll preface my answer with, this is how I answer just about every question about how do I handle behavior? And the answer is, it depends. And so, we take that individualized approach. And so it's very difficult to say, here's what you should do, here's what you should always do, and here's what everybody should do. But we need to know what the behavior is, why the behavior occurs, as Kevin has mentioned, in looking at the environment. What about the environment brings the behavior about, or what about the environment supports its continued use? So, and then if a parent is concerned about, well, how do I respond to the behavior? we can think about responding to the behavior in the immediate aftermath, like seconds after the behavior occurs, and then hours or later on in the day. So in the immediate aftermath, the parent needs or should, in the best of all worlds, they should respond to the behavior in a way that limits the chances that the behavior will occur again in the future. So as an example, if we know, if the parent has learned, or we've done an assessment that shows that the child's behavior, the challenging behavior, occurs to get parent attention, in that immediate aftermath, we might want to limit the amount of attention that's provided. Obviously, keep the child safe, keep yourself safe. And then maybe later on in the day, sit down with the child, remind them, hey, when I'm busy and you need my attention, you can raise your hand or you can say mom or dad. Let's practice, right? And you're kind of reviewing with them what the behaviors are that are appropriate that gets them that same outcome. And what the parent, if they're very savvy, what they can also do is if they see the child escalating, maybe they're not quite at the level of exhibiting the challenging behavior, they can remind them, hey, remember, if you need to talk to me, say mom, say dad.
It's very similar to how we set expectations in our classroom for our children as well, that, if you need support, these are the things that you can do even before the behaviors are exhibited, or if they need that support at that time, we go and reiterate to them that these are the expectations, or raise your hand, or just tap and let us know what you need. Right?
And I'll add to that as difficult as it can be in the aftermath of the challenging behavior episode, try not to hold a grudge, right? Move on to what the next part of the day is, and try not to be to let what happened at 10 o'clock ruin what's going to happen at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and so on. Easier said than done, but
you had said something to me in our earlier conversation about, one is we can set our learners up for known situations, but how do we do that when we don't know what might happen, right? So can you speak to that also?
Could you repeat the question?
One thing is see if it's a classroom setup, or if I'm going to a birthday party, I'm going to a relative's house, we know what the learner can expect. But say we're going to the mall and there's so many unknowns, there's going to be a lot of people. You had spoken about, pre-programming when we know, but pre-programming when we don't know. What can families do in that?
The question of pre-programming, I think if we understand the relationship or the relation between the child's challenging behavior and the environment, we might be able to anticipate some of the things. So we go to the mall, and maybe this is a child who, I'm listening to all the horns honk in the background, right? And that's not something that I'm used to, but maybe and it's distracting to me. So maybe for that child going to the mall, we know that it's going to be loud and distracting. And you were talking about the student who has the headphones. Like, hey, we're going to go to the mall. It might be loud there. Bring your headphones so that you can use them if it's too loud when we're there. When we're at the mall, I'm going to be shopping. I can't attend to you and shop at the same time. If you need me, remember, how do you get my attention? Let's practice. So you may not be able to pre-program exactly for the situation, but because you know that loud noises or lack of attention are things that typically precede challenging behavior, and you know that those are likely events, as you go to the mall, you can try to review with the child what their appropriate behaviors can be.
This is interesting because I've been working with a child who was 4 earlier and now is a teenager. But this pre-programming and preparing for the unknown has been done so much for him that it's become one of his strategies. Like today, when he goes to an environment that he has not heard of, he researches on it. He asks questions about it. And then he prepares himself that these are certain things that I can do. And I think as adults, even we prepare ourselves for, today, I can prepare for this conversation. Yeah, we have our notes. So it's very similar, but we are also teaching those coping strategies to our children as well, right?
So there's definitely value in pre-programming, but also the reflection piece that Joel spoke about. Like after the event has happened, you've made connections. So then practicing what you can do or how can you respond differently next time, I feel that really helps because the experience has given you some background on what it feels like, what your thoughts are in the moment, and then kind of practicing about like what a better response would be. I feel like there's a lot of learning in that too.
Adults do that so much. Like, I know if I've had a tough conversation, I'll go back and it's almost like you're replaying everything I said, the person said, how did I feel? And then, you're taking that memory and saying, next time I'm in this situation, these are things that I want to do, but these are things I definitely don't want to do. So, coming back to what you said in the beginning, it is truly a spectrum. So it's not about that we're just saying these are skills or strategies for individuals with autism. It's what we all do. And we're now just adapting those strategies to help a more diverse population.
I just want to add on to that, the notion of practicing after an event has occurred. That shouldn't be the only time. So we want to practice proactively as well. So a lot of the individuals that Kevin and I work with, we identify the relation between the environment and their behavior, including the consequences that maintain them. And then we set up during the day opportunities to practice. We don't wait for them to be upset and exhibit challenging behavior to then practice appropriate behavior. We set up opportunities ongoing throughout the day to have them practice using the appropriate behavior in the situations that are evocative of challenging behavior.
And Joel, the aim there being automaticity, like the more I practice that in that moment, it comes a little bit more naturally to me.
Yeah, so we take a very behavioral approach. And so the terminology that I might use is we are building a history of reinforcement. Mm-hmm. And so when a behavior contacts reinforcement often, that behavior becomes more fluent and more likely to occur. And so if a child has had the experience that, well, when I say, talk to me, the probability of whoever talking to me is 100%, then they're more likely to use that strategy moving forward in the future, particularly if that strategy provides better levels of attention.
So we teach social pragmatics, and practice is a big part. So we do a lot of role playing in social pragmatics. So they know the responses, like we said, are more pre-programmed then. And it's easier for them to communicate in different situations because they already have the language through the practice. It also reduces so many emotions, right? Like my anxiety is lower when I have rehearsed something, when I have a bank of strategies with me beforehand. So the emotional aspect of it also plays a role.
I think one thing I struggle with is, where's that balance between practice and providing scripts and providing language? Because like you were saying, Pooja, right? So many of our young adults with autism now talk in scripts, right? Which feels a little awkward. So if we're helping empower you to be in the community, are the scripts helping? Is that a starting point? What do you do in that space?
You want to take that or you want me to?
I think that when you're practicing those behaviors over and over again, you might develop some default things that you go to. Okay? We all do that. And I think that's okay. The challenge from an educator standpoint is providing multiple different options and making sure that you're not training just one way to ask your teacher for help, or one way to, go into a grocery store and ask for, how do I find? That you're allowing them the opportunity to choose between some different options. And it's important when you're teaching and training that you're reinforcing those options so that they learn that, hey, all these variations, they can get me the same type of thing.
So giving opportunities for generalization.
And I think in India, in different languages also, right? Because then that's where true generalization happens. Yeah.
So Joel, you've often said that what one might perceive as defiance is actually a child feeling overwhelmed. My question is, how can you tell the difference between a child refusing to do something versus a child who just can't respond in the moment?
Yeah. So we talk a lot about the difference between can't do and won't do, and can't do is the child doesn't have the skill. And again, I mean, I take a very behavioral approach to it. So, defiance is a label that we put on a behavior when a child doesn't do something that's been asked of them. So they're being defiant. What do you mean they're being defiant? Well, they didn't do what I asked. Okay, well, why didn't they do what you asked? Because they're defiant. No. Okay, we have to step out of that loop. They didn't do what was asked because they either don't know how to do what was asked, or the motivation to do what was asked is low at that moment. So we can tell the difference by having taken data, and if we have observed that the child has exhibited that skill in the past under other different conditions, we've asked them to do the skill and they've done it. So we know they have the skill in their repertoire. And so right now there's a motivation deficit. And so what do we need to do to increase the motivation to do the task? Do we need to add a larger reinforcer? Do we need to break the task into smaller pieces? Maybe it's too overwhelming to write their whole name, but they can write the first two letters of their name, right? Then on the other end of that, other side of that is maybe we've never seen the skill. And so that defiance then is a can't do. And when that's the case, then we need to take some time to break the skill down into smaller steps and teach the first step of the skill and focus there. So I think, again, this is why we talk so much about data collection, because it can inform how we interpret behavior, and then it can give us direction to go when we see, and when we don't see, in this case, the behavior that we would like the child to exhibit.
We see that many children with autism have repetitive behaviors like pacing or stimming or even repeating phrases to regulate themselves. How do you decide when to support the child versus when to simply accept that behavior?
I think the first thing we always think about is safety, right? So if the child is doing anything that might put them in an unsafe situation or put others around them in an unsafe situation, we definitely want to step in, support, whether the environment needs to be modified or we need to remove the child from that environment. So I think safety always is our non-negotiable. But I think beyond that, things that I think about. So is it interfering with what that individual needs to be doing in that moment in some way? Is it impacting the others around the individual, interfering with what they need to be doing? Or I often ask myself, is it something that's bothering me or irritating me? So I feel like if it is interfering, we want to step in, support. If it's irritating to me, I need to regulate. And I think the other thing I have realized is if it is interfering, then we need to give them what else can you do that meets that need in a maybe more appropriate way or more socially appropriate way. And Joel, you were talking about that balance, right? If my need is getting met in this behavior at this level, the alternate also has to be at that or a higher level. So I think that's what we need to look at. If I'm asking you to stop doing something, what is my replacement? What is the alternative that I'm also giving you? So you're still getting that need met.
Yeah, that's great.
Monica, I'm also wondering what happens when there is a challenging behavior displayed at a public place. Parents often find that the onlookers are being very judgmental. They may not understand. How can parents respond in that moment?
Pooja, I think that's something we all struggle with, right? And I think in a school environment, we have more control, we have more awareness, we have more compassion, we have more support. I think when you are in the real world, people will look and people will judge, people may comment. We can't control that. So I think the thing that I think about is what is within my control and what is not in my control. So even with all of that happening, if my focus goes there, I'm not helping my child. I'm not helping the individual. And I think that's the shift that helps me, right? So I can control my reaction. I can control how I respond to this individual. So then hopefully the learning that they're getting, like Joel said, is not reinforcing this behavior the next time. But I think I would focus on that. I think the other thing that's happening slowly here is that the community as a whole is becoming more aware, right? So like we said, there's more Bollywood movies that are coming out that talk about diverse individuals. So I think we see more awareness creeping in. We see people will turn and then look away. I do also see in those situations, oftentimes there is compassion. There is that need to, how do I support? Do I step in? Do I not? So you see that dance that's happening even with the onlookers. I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think focus on what you can control versus on what others may be doing.
And it is about the individual in that moment who needs support rather than the person who is more regulated and calm in the moment.
Just to add on, I worked in a hospital clinic for a long time, and so the parents were always there at the appointments, and we talked about this situation a lot. And we would do some just kind of like psychoeducation with the parent. When you're in public, you might receive this type of feedback from onlookers or other people in the public, and then talk through how are you going to respond. And the best suggestion I would give them is just to ignore everybody else. You're doing what you know is best for your child because you have sought assistance, you've been taught how to handle the behavior, and you're doing that. And everybody else can just butt out. I would so far as to give them my card and say, have them call me if they have a question. And then I'll tell them that we can't discuss confidential patient matters.
But that's so interesting, right? Because the same thing we're doing with our learners, we're also helping our parents with that. Because it isn't easy, but if we help them practice, then they also have the language in that moment of what to say.
So we have been talking about there's so much learning for parents of individuals with autism or autistic individuals. And Joel, caregivers are not just thinking about managing today, but they also want to plan for the future. And they're very worried about things like school, friendships, inclusion. So the parents that you encounter, the people that you meet, the families that you work with, do you tell them about, little things that parents can do on a daily basis to help their children develop coping skills for school, for life, for the community?
Yeah, I think we don't really speak of it so much as coping skills, but just skills in general, right? And the things that we work on and try to emphasize with the families with whom we work is building the individual's independence and building their communication. And if we can do those two things, that's going to go a long way toward allowing them to navigate more typical environments with less difficulty. So what can a parent do to help their child build independence? When my children were young, we were always running late, and so it was easy for me to get them dressed as opposed to them dressing themselves. But for the kids, that wasn't the best thing, right? So remind myself it's okay to be late. It's better that they put their jacket on themselves, or that they put their shoes on their own, right? So building that independence, looking for those opportunities. Dinner's over. I mean, this is probably a culturally biased example, but when dinner is over, we often we clear our plates and take it to the kitchen or take it to the sink, and so having the child do that independently, as opposed to me just getting everybody's plate and taking it in. It's a little thing, but it's fostering independence, and then the communication piece, right? Individuals with autism, autistic individuals, we know that communication struggles. That's a hallmark of the diagnostic condition. So emphasizing and allowing for practice of communication throughout the day in many different situations, right? Like those two things, independence and communication, will be the things that can help out. And then the third piece to kind of add on to that is, providing reinforcement for when they do those things independently, when they communicate, and then becoming less and less frequent with those reinforcers, so that the behaviors are not dependent on encountering a reinforcer every time it occurs. But not taking away entirely where we want the behavior. We have to hit that balance of keeping the behavior going, but not being overwhelming with our implementation.
I think it's something I ask myself every day, right? Am I helping or am I over helping? Because the intent is to support, but sometimes when we're just stepping in and always doing it, then those skills aren't getting built, or there's not enough opportunity to practice and, kind of have that skill become a part of your repertoire.
I also feel consistency is very important. So, we can't be doing this like 1 or 2 days and then like there's a lag in the middle and then again we pick up the pace. I think the predictability and knowing what the expectations are helps.
So, before we close for today, I have one last question for all three of you. As behavior interventionists in your journey, what was that one moment with a child where your understanding of behavior changed? Monica, would you like to go first?
Maren, I've been in the field for 15 years, my goodness. I don't know that there was a specific instance, but I think what has stuck with me is the emotions. So I know that when I've been in a moment where somebody was having a challenging day and displaying a challenging behavior, it was how I walked away feeling after supporting and how the individual walked away feeling. And then I also know there are days where that feeling wasn't a pleasant feeling. And I think when I look back, what has stuck with me is compassion in that moment, support in that moment, assuming, what you were saying, Joel, if they're not doing what we would like for them to do, is it that they don't know how to do, and is it something that we take away and teach, versus jumping to that assumption of you're not doing it, you won't do it. So it's, instead of becoming frustrated, being present, supporting, and then taking that moment as a reflection piece and seeing what can we do differently. So I think it's that feeling, like I've had learners who've come back and said, I'm sorry I hit. Are you still going to talk to me? And, that's hard, right? Because that means that in the past, the learning has been, I have hit, this person isn't there for me. And then we've had learners who have screamed and shouted and abusive language is there. And then they come back and they say like, it was almost like that wasn't me. I don't know what happened. Like, can you help me? So I feel like if we can just show up, that's what has stuck with me. Show up in those moments, and then the rest we can navigate.
So, Monica, definitely showing up and being there. But also what you said before, like knowing what your threshold is and getting help. I feel like that's a big piece. Because the adult in the situation, supporting with the regulation also needs to be regulated and feel okay in that moment. So,
Would one of you like to go?
Go ahead. All right. When she started saying the question, I was like, well, it's child-centric, but my first work with individuals with developmental disabilities was with adults. And so I was a psychology major. I took courses on, cognitive psychology and other types of psychology, and never saw the outcomes of any type of psychotherapy. Just read, if you do this for 6 months, then people feel better, based on a survey. And then I took a class that worked with, as part of the class, we worked with adults with intellectual disability who engaged in self-injurious behavior. So these were individuals probably in the severe to profound range of intellectual disability, non-speaking individuals, maybe autism, maybe not. And I remember the first day that I went into it was a lab class. I went into the class, and one of the PhD students was kind of orienting me to what we were going to do. And he showed me, when I do this, watch what happens with behavior. And then when I do this, watch what happens. And in 10 minutes, I saw behavior change. and I saw it change for the better. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So that was my kind of epiphany. And we took data on it also.
I guess a somewhat similar story going back to, I was a public school teacher, teaching middle school age students, 10 to 14 or so, and that had all the college coursework and so forth. But I had my first really challenging case, and it was a young man for whom pretty much every pseudoscientific intervention you could imagine had been tried, and some were still in place. And I received this child who engaged in very high frequency self-injury and aggression. And it was primarily to get out of any kind of instruction. And so going back to, I'd never done this before, teaching a replacement behavior to that and teaching him to ask for a break and watching really high levels of intense behavior go from, 1,900 aggressions a day down to 0, like that. It's like, oh my God, this works. All that other garbage that was being done was a waste of time and money. By taking data and looking at the problem behavior scientifically, evaluating the environment, I was 23 years old. I couldn't believe they entrusted me to do this. Got that behavior change, like, oh my God, I want to do more of this and help kids not engage in those behaviors and build communication. And the kicker, about 15 years later, I'm talking about seeing outcomes. I saw this young man in a grocery store with a care provider walking along, filling his grocery cart and purchasing things. I thought, oh my God, he's kind of made it. That was cool. So, that's kind of what changed my way of looking at things.
That was heartwarming. Yeah, I think we wrap this up with this. I think what I took back from this conversation today, as we spoke so much about behavior, is that it is not as much about stopping, reducing, or fixing something than understanding the behavior itself and why it is happening. That's my takeaway from this conversation today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.